The draft manifesto proposed to renationalise a number of industries. So let's start with the railways. You wait for the franchises to run out rather than buy them out at the moment. So can you confirm that the railways will therefore not be wholly nationalised until 2030 after 3 Labour governments, and Jeremy Corbyn will be 80?
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to comment on leaks, Andrew. You'll just have to be patient and wait and see what's in our manifesto on Tuesday, when our full plan in relation to transport will be laid out in full.
But you've already announced you're going to nationalise the railways.
We have. We've discussed taking We've discussed taking the franchises into public ownership as they expire. However, the detail of that, as I've said, will be set out in the manifesto. So I'm not prepared to go into detail until that policy is formally laid out on Tuesday.
All right. Well, that doesn't sound very hopeful, but let's carry on. The national grid, you're also going to nationalise that. It carries our electricity around the country. It's got a market capitalisation of £40 billion. Why do you want to nationalise that?
Well, again, Andrew, I'm not going to speculate on leaks. I'm afraid you just have to be patient and see what's in our manifesto on Tuesday.
Yeah, but you've said you're going to nationalise the national grid, so tell us why.
We've not. The leaks have suggested, but I'm afraid you'll just have to wait to see what our final manifesto states on that one.
So is it a waste of time for me to ask you how you're going to pay for something that's worth £40 billion?
Well, I'd be patient, Andrew. It's just a couple of more days to go, and then we'll be discussing our industrial strategy and indeed our approach to utilities. Well, what I would say is that there is growing pressure from the public to reform the utility sector. The Competition and Markets Authority stated in 2015 that bill payers were paying over £2 billion in excess of what they should have been paying. So there's a clear need for reform, and we'll be setting that out in full on Tuesday.
The bills we get are from the energy companies. You're not going to nationalise them. You're going to nationalise the distribution company. And I just wondered, what is the case for nationalising the distribution company?
Well, as I've said, our full plans will be set out in the manifesto on Tuesday. In relation to the big 6 energy companies, we know in recent years they have been overcharging customers.
But I'm not asking you about that. Look, if you don't answer my own questions, there's no point in answering questions
this week.
I'm not answering. Rebecca Long-Bailey, I'm asking, what is the case for nationalising the national grid?
Well, there is a case for reforming the energy sector as a whole, and that looks at the activities of the big 6 companies, and it will look at other aspects too. I'm afraid you'll just have to be patient and wait until Tuesday.
What about the Royal Mail? Is that going to be
Well, again, with the Royal Mail, you'll have to wait until Tuesday.
Why?
But we know
Why can't you just be honest with the British voter? Now, we know you're going to do this, and you have a duty to explain why you're doing it. That's all I'm asking. I'm not even arguing with you whether it's right or wrong. I'm just asking you to explain.
Well, let me answer the original question. The Royal Mail was sold off, and we know that it was sold under value. And British taxpayers have a reason to feel quite aggrieved about that. Now, there is a long-term strategy that would ensure that the Royal Mail was classified as a key piece of infrastructure, but the details of that will be set out in our manifesto, because we want to ensure that businesses and households ensure the best quality of service when it comes to their postal providers.
All right. Now, you plan to borrow an extra £25 billion a year. John McDonnell's already announced this, on public investment. That's on top of the around £50 billion that's already being planned for investment. You're going to borrow it all. So that means, I think, if you can confirm, that many, many years after the crash, by 2021, 2022, a Labour government would still be borrowing £75 billion a year. Is that correct?
What we've set out is £250 billion of capital investment and £250 billion for a national investment bank. Now, our financial and fiscal rules dictate that we will leave the government in a state of less debt than we found it at the start of the Parliament. So we aren't going to increase the national debt at the end of our parliamentary term.
Well, how can you do that, though, if by 2021 you will still be borrowing about £75 billion a year, which is more than we borrow at the moment.
As I said, the £500 billion figure is set out over a period of 10 years. Now, this is a figure that's been suggested by Dieter Helm from Oxford University as a figure that's necessary to bring us in line with our other industrial competitors. Similar figures have been suggested by groups such as the CBI. We simply have to invest in the tools that businesses need to grow and thrive.
By the way, I've not included all 500 billion. I just included the 250 billion on public spending, not the extra money for the investment bank. Now, you talk about your fiscal rules. The draft manifesto said that you leave debt as a proportion of trend GDP lower at the end of each parliament. You've just said a version of that. What's trend GDP?
Well, as we've said, in clear terms, we'll ensure that the debt that we acquire will be reduced by the end of the Parliament. We won't leave the government finances in a worse state than we found them.
OK, but what's trend GDP?
Well, as I've said, and I'll explain it in clear terms, our rule is that we'll ensure that public sector net debt is less than we found it when we came to power in government on June the 8th.
But with respect, that's not what your draft manifesto says. It says as a proportion of... It doesn't
well,
say,
I'm not going to comment on
leaks.
I'm not going to comment on leaks, Andrew. I'm afraid you're just going to have to wait until Tuesday